We're going to focus entirely on Tory Island in this video. We're going to look at Derek Hill and how he came to first visit Tory Island. We're going to look at the island itself. Then we're going to look at James Dixon, who was the first of the Tory Island painters, and then the other painters and their legacy. And finally, I'm going to point out a few of the flaws in this exhibition. Derek Hill bought the Glebe House in the early 1950s and moved in round about 1953 or 54. But only a couple of years later, only when he was still settling into the house, he heard about Tory Island. He heard about what an interesting place Tory was. I think he met the lighthouse keeper on a train and they struck up a conversation, and Derek Hill was hooked on the idea of going to Tory so that he could paint this wonderful beauty that he'd heard about. So Derek Hill went to visit Tory in the mid to late 1950s. We're not sure exactly when. He stayed for a few days and loved the place. So he returned year after year to paint his own landscapes and seascapes. And you can see some of them illustrated here. Now, most of these paintings aren't in this exhibition. As I said, there's only one Derek Hill Tory Island landscape in the show, and that's called After Paul Henry. It's a beautiful small piece that was probably painted later on his time in Tory, maybe the 80s or the 90s even. I don't think Derek expected to fall in love with Tory Island the way that he did. I don't think he expected to go there to paint portraits, which was his main job, if you like. But he did paint some wonderful portraits of Tory Islanders. And again, the pictures illustrated here are not in this exhibition. You can see them in the Glebe House in the kitchen. Derek Hill did paint the picturesque side of Tory Island though. He painted wonderful rock formations and he painted seascapes and landscapes. Tory Gully is one of his most famous paintings from Tory Island, and I've seen a couple of different versions of Tory Gully, and in fact the one that's illustrated here isn't the one that we own that's in our collection in the Glebe House. But Derek Hill saw Tory Island as a very serene, beautiful, picturesque place. He visited normally in July or August, so he wouldn't have seen the island in the depths of winter, for instance, and the sort of storms that he would have experienced on Tory would have been summer storms. Very dramatic all the same, but I think more comfortable than being isolated on the island for weeks or months on end during the winter, which frequently happened to the islanders. So he saw Tory as a very beautiful place. James Dixon was the first of the Tory Island artists, and there's a wonderful story told about how he and Derek Hill first became friends. Derek was painting on the island one Sunday, and after Mass, the villagers gathered round to watch him at work. James Dixon, in a typically offhand remark, told Derek that he could do better himself if he tried. And Derek liked this, he liked the challenge, so he asked Dixon to paint a picture for him and offered to send him paint and paper. Dixon didn't want canvas, he wanted to paint on paper, and brushes, paint brushes. But James Dixon refused the paint brushes because he said he could make his own just as well. And the first painting that James Dixon produced for Derek was West End Village, which is an iconic painting in Irish art. But before we look at James Dixon and the other Tory Island artists, I think it's important to paint a picture of Tory itself and of life on Tory. When Derek Hill first went to Tory in the 1950s, there were about 300 people living there. That's half, there's about 150, maybe a little less on Tory now. It's the most remote inhabited Irish island and is almost 15 kilometres off the coast. It's a long, narrow island, about 5 kilometres long and 1 kilometre deep. Starting at the left, there's a lighthouse. Then moving towards the right, you come to West End Village, or West Town, which is the larger of the two villages. It has the pier that you see in so many of the paintings, and it also has the round tower. Moving on then, you come to East Town, which is a much smaller collection of only a few houses, and then on to Tormore, which is a magnificent sea cliff outcrop of the island. So the island's steeped in culture, history and tradition, and it's an Irish-speaking island also, and Irish is very much the first language of the islanders. We can see that again in these two paintings by James Dixon. They're 1 metre high and together 7 metres wide, and they form a map of Tory Island. But you can see from them that Dixon spent more time dealing with the houses and the buildings where people lived and the farms than he did with the sea cliffs and the beautiful views around, like Derrick Hill. Because they're so large, we have nowhere to store them properly, so they kind of have to be on exhibition all the time. So the tea room was the only place that we could leave them permanently on exhibition. And the battens that you've seen in some of the photographs are the battens that the pictures rest on when they're on show. But they have been on exhibition here on and off for too many years, and it's time to give them a rest. And that was an opportunity to reimagine the exhibition. So the Derrick Hill's Donegal that you see in this exhibition is really only 1 year old. Derrick Hill was amazed by West End Village. It's such a powerful painting and shows a very unique view of the island. And I think he was fascinated by James Dixon and his potential. So he went back to Dixon and asked him to paint more and offered to help and try and sell the work for him. And actually, after only a few years, James Dixon's reputation had grown significantly, and Derrick was able to get a gallery in London to represent James Dixon, the Portal Gallery, and they sold his paintings from the early 60s right up until Dixon's death in 1970. And I love that this old fisherman on Tory Island had a dealer in London and a gallery representing him when there wouldn't have been really much else going on in the visual arts in the northwest of Ireland. When we talk about the Tory Island School of Painters, they're often described as naive or primitive painters, and that term doesn't sit comfortably with me. I think because it implies that they don't have a wide experience of the world, that they're not sophisticated people, and of course they are, they live in the same world as you and I. But I think James Dixon maybe did fit into that category of somebody who didn't have a wide exposure to the modern world. Even in the 60s and 70s, Tory Island would have been an isolated community, much more so than anywhere else in Ireland, even on other Irish islands like the Aran Islands and Galway, which would have had more communication, more interaction with the mainland. It was also very unusual to have somebody like James Dixon, who was naive in that lovely sense, in the 1970s. So he's kind of a bit like a fish out of water. He's kind of the last of the true naive artists. And it's not fair on the other artists, even his contemporary Tory artists, to paint them as naive or primitive. So I like the term folk art in that respect. While James Dixon was having success, some of the other islanders also began to paint, and we have two of those artists represented in this exhibition. We have Rory Rogers and Patsy Dan Rogers. So the painting here by Rory Rogers is of Derrick Hill's hut on Tory Island, and then this painting by Patsy Dan Rogers is called Tory Island at Dawn. Some of you may know that Patsy Dan Rogers was the king of Tory Island. The Tory Island artists have done a very remarkable thing on Tory Island, very unique, I think, in all the world. They have created a record of island life over the last 60 years. They haven't used a lot of artistic license. They haven't made it look any more beautiful than it is. They just repeat the subjects over and over and over again. And when you see a large exhibition of Tory Island art, it's almost unsettling to see the rate of change, how things change slowly or quickly, how in some of the paintings somebody maybe painted their house a different colour and then changed it back later on. And I can't think of anywhere else in the world where a small community has painted itself constantly over that length of time. Over here is a photograph of Tormore by Kevin Kiley. It's a little bit more contemporary than the other things in the exhibition, but not nearly as contemporary as the photographs that we talked about in the last film. And then below it is a photograph of Erskine Childers when he was the Irish president. He came to Donegal in the late 70s and asked Derek to bring him out to Tory. He was really fascinated by what he'd heard about Tory Island. So Derek brought him out, and the Islanders were delighted to see him on Tory. The photograph is of him sitting on a chair on a trailer that's being pulled by a tractor, and I think he loved the whole experience of Tory. Derek did a wonderful portrait of Erskine Childers and based it on this photograph. These photographs were taken by Derek Hill, I think on some of his first visits to Tory. The bottom photograph just depicts some Islanders looking back at him on the boat on the way to Tory, but the top one I think is really interesting. There's a calf, a young cow in the boat, and I think it makes us realise how difficult it was to survive on an island like that was so remote. You know, when you think about how did they get livestock onto the island, how treacherous must that have been, putting a large animal on a boat, on a small boat. The portrait at the end then is by Tom Halifax, who was a very good friend of Derek's. It's a portrait of Derek, and it was painted in the early 1990s. And it shows Derek sitting on a deck chair that washed off the ship, the California. Derek brought a lot of trained, sophisticated artists like Tom Halifax to Tory Island, and they looked for the beauty in Tory like Derek did. And I think, although their paintings are very beautiful and are wonderful paintings, I don't think they captured life on Tory the way that the Islanders can do it. At the start of the video, I said I would point out a few of the flaws in the exhibition, and there are several flaws. I think, as far as Tory Island goes, the sample of paintings and photographs and things that show Tory Island is just too small to really tell you enough about the island. So that's a good thing to pick up on. And it's a wonderful opportunity to research Tory Island. There's plenty online about Tory, about the Tory Island artists, for instance. Another one of the flaws in this exhibition is that there was another Tory artist who worked at this period and still works today, a beautiful painter called Anton Meenan, and his dates just didn't quite cross with the collection that we have, in that he started to paint just around the exact time that Derek Hill gave the collection to the Irish people. So there aren't any of his paintings in the collection that we own, and there aren't any of his pictures in this exhibition, and that's a huge gap. He is more important than, he's too important to be left out. There's also another generation of younger Tory Island artists, and they're not represented at all in this exhibition. So while this is certainly a capsule of life on Tory in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even, there's much more to Tory than that, and that will be a nice area to explore in your studies. As I said earlier, Derek Hill brought a lot of people to Tory. He loved the place, he was really impressed by it, and he wanted to show his friends what it was like. They were interested themselves, they'd all heard his stories and other stories, they had seen paintings, so he had a captive audience. And every now and again, some of these people had wonderful insights. And I think the most interesting came from John Berger, the art critic. He described Tory as being like a boat adrift with wreck survivors, but with no hope of reaching the mainland. Now that's a bit harsh. I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to go to Tory Island to go there. Go in summer and see the beauty of the place, but also think about what it must be like to live there all year round. You can ask yourself, is Tory romanticised in these paintings, or is it a realistic view of what it must be like to live on Tory? I think you'll find a little bit of both. The Tory Island paintings and photographs in this exhibition show you two sides of life on Tory Island. They show you the beautiful, picturesque summer existence that Derek Hill and visitors to the island experience, but they also show you the toughness of life on Tory and the resilience of the people who live there, who choose to make it their home and to remain on Tory. So in the next two videos, we're going to look at the design of the exhibition and at the environment. These are two things that examiners like to see. What we've covered up until now with the content is more important. Content's always more important than form. But your examiners do like to see that you understand the workings behind the scenes of an exhibition. So good luck with your studies. I hope the lockdown is going well for you, that you're getting a good opportunity to revise and you're able to find a quiet corner at home to do your work.